Reverse by Black K. Cat. Chapter 47. Sedition.
We're not going to have much time to make this work.
Jolted out of his thoughts, Kisame looks up from the kunai he's sharpening, eyes finding Obito where he's leaning over a map. The man's mask is off, discarded near the door, and the shadows curl interestingly across the deep scars on his face.
You found them?
He asks and could feel a grin threatening. That sounds promising. Obito glances at him and there's a flicker of emotion in his features that might almost be amusement.
One of my spies in Kiri sent me word that they departed yesterday on a ship headed for Konoha's port city.
Kisame calculates times and the distances involved. His Kiri never did much trading with Konoha, but he visited Fire Country's main port a few times, enough to know the length of the trip. As long as the Jinchuriki didn't stop somewhere along the way, and they'd be stupid too, knowing who's after them, they'll be landing in Fire Country today, and probably hitting the road right away to camp somewhere when it gets dark. Shinobi don't tend to linger in cities unless they have to. Ordinarily, someone wanting to intercept them would have to leave now, cross the majority of two countries at the next best thing to a flat-out sprint, and pray that they could make it before the group hit Konoha. Obito doesn't look like he's in any rush to move, though, and Kisame eyes him for a moment, then asks,
You got a way to get us there in time?
Obito blinks, as though it hadn't even occurred to him that would be a problem.
Of course,
he says, and vanishes. Kisame sits back against the wall, mildly startled, but a bare second later the air warps in reverse and Obito appears directly in front of him, the Sharingan in his right eye spinning lazily.
Well, there's a neat trick,
Kisame says, starting to grin. The words earn him another ghost of a smile, barely present but still clearly visible now that Kisame knows what to look for.
Distance won't be a concern,
is all he says, though.
Did you find anything?
With his snake. Kisame checks his kunai, judges it decently sharp, and slips it away.
I found the notes he keeps in his room and checked the ones in his labs and the cell. I'm not the best with seals, but it looks like that one will work without any gaps.
Obito doesn't look entirely convinced, and Kisame doesn't blame him because he's not convinced either. Orochimaru isn't the type they should trust blindly, should put any faith in at all, really. And just because Kisame didn't find anything doesn't mean it's not there.
They'll keep looking,
he says, and gets a short nod in return.
They'll reach Konoha within 2 days,
Obito says, turning back to his map. His fingers curl around the edge of the table, knuckles going white, and Kisame studies them for a moment, feeling a flicker of something that's not quite amusement, but could possibly be close. That's a lot of anger for one man to live with, not that he doesn't understand it. The entire world is going to hell, and this is their chance to turn it around.
We need to catch them on the road, so...
Kisame pushes to his feet and goes to join him, leaning over his shoulder to watch one finger trace a path from the port to Konoha.
You think they'll take the main road?
He asks, a little surprised. Obito casts him a look, one brow sliding up towards his hairline.
10 Jinchuriki, he points out. 8 of whom have some level of control, 1 of whom is the Mizukage, and 1 who managed to beat the Mizukage in a fight. And 2 of the Mizukage's guards, 4 of Konoha's best shown in the 3rd stage, and Senju Tsunade and her apprentice. They won't be worried about an attack.
Well, but that way Kisame can see why. It's also kind of disconcerting how fast they're picking up allies. He's pretty sure that the Sannin Tsunade wasn't with them when they attacked the base before. He chuckles a little, glancing over to where Samehada is leaning beside the door and asks,
So that's when we eat them?
The look Obito gives him is bordering on amused, though it only really shows in his eyes.
Yes,
he agrees and reaches out to tap a point on the road. A river intersects the path with a steep cliff on one side and a forest on the other.
We'll have to scatter the rest of the party, but the others can take care of that. Uzumaki and Kakashi will likely stay with the youngest of the children, so we bring the puppets there and distract them.
Kisame doesn't have to ask what Obito will be doing. The children who can't yet control their Biju will be vulnerable, easy targets to snatch away. The Gedo Mazo hasn't been repaired yet, but a head start on gathering the Jinchuriki, especially Jinchuriki who won't be able to fight back and have only a slim chance of escaping, can only give them an advantage.
How do I get?
He asks with a grin, more than ready for this fight. It's going to be a heck of a lot of fun, that's for sure. Another half-second of humor, clear enough, and Obito looks back down at the map.
Whoever tries to interfere,
He says, and doesn't ask, can you manage? The way most people would. Whether it's because he trusts in Kisame's skills that much or just assumes he'll be fine regardless. Either way, Kisame kind of likes the assumption.
Another big fight after just a week? You spoiled me.
He jokes, and this time the amused tilt of Obito's mouth is actually visible. Kisame chuckles, inordinately pleased with himself, and says,
A step closer to the dream. Huh?
For a long moment, Obito simply looks at him, red black Sharingan still spinning lazily. Kisame has never had the chance to see one activated before. He's fought in Uchiha a time or two, but shinobi outside of Konoha learn early on that it's always best to keep your eyes shut when you're up against one. Obito is an ally, though, and beyond that, his Sharingan is always activated. It's interesting, Kisame thinks, and then as to chuckle a little at himself. There's a lot that's interesting about this situation. Obito glances away back down at the map and breathes out, slow and steady. His knuckles have gone white where he's gripping the table again.
right?
He agrees almost soundless, and his eyes fall shut. Just for a moment, he looks tired, weary in a way that sleep won't touch. Abruptly, almost challengingly, he asks,
What do you want to see?
Kasame doesn't have to ask to know that he's referring to the world of truth they're going to build. He leans against the table, considering it, and then says,
I think the fact of it will be enough. Some white lies don't mean anything, and people can see the truth just by opening their eyes.
This time Obito's smile is more obvious, but also far more crooked, touched with the same tiredness that's in his face.
You should have been one of the heroes of Kiri, Kisame,
He says, and the words are almost wry.
My world is a lot more selfish than that.
Kasame doesn't try to convince him otherwise. He has no idea what Obito wants. Wants the world is better, but if he thinks it's selfish, he's probably the best judge.
The good thing about a word like that,
He offers.
is that being selfish once in a while isn't going to hurt anyone. You can't just dress it up as if it's for the good of everyone.
Another short, careful exhale, and Kasame pretends not to hear the way it shakes as it leaves Obito's lungs. He watches silently as Obito presses a hand over his face and wonders if he notices that he automatically covers the scars before anything else. There's something that still seems so torn about him, something deep inside, and Kasame wonders if anyone else has ever had the chance to see it.
This reality is broken.
Obito says, and Kisame can't tell if it's to himself or meant for other ears.
It's warped and twisted, and not as it should be. We have to fix it.
He hesitates for a moment, but why not? It's hardly the most dangerous thing he's done, so he claps Obito lightly on the shoulder and tries not to think of the bodies of his comrades thick upon the ground and the way it felt when he killed them. Killed them because of a traitor's lies, a traitor who Kisame then killed as well. Too much killing, all of it pointless, and Kisame is all for a good fight, but loyalty once given should never be a lie.
we will.
He says and lets go again, pretending not to see the way Obito turns, watching as he goes to collect Samehara.
Orochimaru has 12 hours to finalize the seals.
The Uchiha says, and Kisame is more than happy to follow the change of subject.
After that, I'll start moving Akatsuki into position.
I'll let the others know.
Kisame agrees cheerfully, shouldering his sword. He glances back, holding Obito's dangerous eyes for one more moment, then nods and leaves the room.
What do you mean Arjun Churaki's been kidnapped?
Hisan demands, not quite in Hiruzen says, enough to earn a punch, but also quite certainly too much so to even be
Bordering unpolite.
You haven't noticed?
Raza asks, quite clearly unimpressed, as he folds his arms across his chest, watching Taki's headman bristle without so much as a trace of weariness. Hiruzen can't quite blame him. Hisan might be the headman of the only village outside the 5 nations strong enough to be granted a bijou, but the man is quick to anger and arrogant about the strength that Taki's hero water grants. Hisan shoots him a dark look, but finally steps away from Hiruzen's desk. The girl knows her duty, he says sharply. She may leave to wander, but she always returns. Taki's Jinchuriki is his granddaughter, if Hiruzen remembers correctly, and he can't quite hide the faint grimace that crosses his face. Thankfully, his hand's back is already turned, but Hiruzen catches A's flash of amusement as his expression. If he knew its source, Hiruzen suspects he would be far closer to offended. After all, even though Kumo treats its Jinchuriki better, that doesn't exactly mean it treats them well. And the fact that the Nibi's host ran straight to Kurama rather than her village says quite a lot. Not one country in all of the elemental nations has treated their Jinchuriki anywhere close to how they should, and Hiruzen rather expects that they're about to feel the backlash of that decision.
And 2 dead Jonin aren't enough to convince you that you've lost her loyalty?
Rasa asks, grimly amused. Hissen scoffs. Unrelated, he insists. This rogue Jinchuriki may have killed them, but Fu wouldn't have.
And the fact that you can't find her?
Rasa raises one red brow, and when Hissen only glares without a word, he nods as if that's answer enough.
Regardless, a summit has been called, and you accepted the invitation. If you're still doubtful, wait for the Kage to gather, and you'll get your evidence. Onoki has been convinced to drag himself out of his mountains.
Hiruzen interjects before the offense on Hissen's face can spark another argument.
He will arrive tomorrow, and Yagura the day after. Kusa's head woman informed me they are also on their way, though I have no estimation for their arrival.
Left unsaid is who exactly will accompany Yagura's party, but Hiruzen feels no need to share that information with Taki's leader if he can't even be bothered to believe his Jinchuriki is well and truly gone. And Hiruzen is certain that she is. Kurama's influence is likely there to stay, and he for one owes Naruto too much to try and take his uncle away from him. The younger Jinchuriki's collective uncle, if Tenzo's last report is to be believed. All the Jinchuriki except for B are likely gone, Hiruzen thinks a little wryly, taking a long pull on his pipe. Even Yagura and Kiri's other Jinchuriki can likely be included in that count after recent events. None of the nations will be gaining their loyalty anytime soon, that's for certain. Boy, A rumbles, leaning back in his chair. That message have anything about him in it? Hiruzen glances at the scroll one of Itachi's crows left on his desk, written in Tenzo's hand and signed by him, which would already be a decent indicator that Kakashi was injured enough that he couldn't manage it, even if the report hasn't said as much. Kakashi likes to act as if he's irresponsible, but he'd never leave a direct report to the Hokage for his second-in-command if he had a choice.
Injured but recovering,
he says, instead of voicing his worries.
They were planning to stop briefly in Frost Country to find a healer before continuing on to Giri. Several of them received injuries, but Tenzo is optimistic about their chances of recovery.
A inclines his head in silent thanks, not asking anything more. Akatsuki will be moving soon, he says instead. The attack was a setback, but it won't last forever. He meets Hiruzen's eyes across the room, and Hiruzen can see they're sharing a similar thought. For all that the various countries will be very unhappy with it, having all the Jinchuriki in one place might be for the best. At least that way they're easily defensible. And defense is most certainly what they'll be playing now. The statue Jiraiya described, the one Kurama was in such a rush to destroy, sounds like it was something integral to Akatsuki's plan. Hiruzen knows better than most that cornered rats fight the hardest. The thought makes his fingers curl just a little more tightly around his pipe, and he pushes to his feet before he can think better of it. Excusing himself with a murmur that doesn't quite make itself clear, he steps out the door of his office and shuts it carefully behind him. The guards they had earlier ejected from the room are here, hovering quietly and not quite mingling, but Hiruzen is just glad they haven't started another war yet. Stepping forward, he catches Genma's eye, tipping his head just faintly. The Tokujo's brows lift, but he slides off his perch on the windowsill next to Raido and wanders over, hands in his pockets and a casual slouch to his shoulders. Between Genma's lazy demeanor and Raido's sheepish smile, Hiruzen has to wonder how many of the other guards have managed to overlook the fact that these are two of Konoha's deadliest assassins. Most of them, he assumes, Genma and Raido, are well practiced at appearing harmless. Hokage-sama? Genma asks, pulling the senbon out of his mouth as he inclines his head.
Genma,
Hiruzen returns, managing a faint smile.
I have a mission for you.
Hazel eyes sharpen, and without otherwise moving, Genma gives the impression of a wolf coming alert, ready to hunt. Do I need to get my mask? He asks, perfectly mild. Hiruzen considers for a moment, then nods.
You had best.
He confirms and watches the hunters surface further. Half a glance around them, and he knows it's as private as they're likely to get. Disappearing to go somewhere more secure would just increase suspicions at this point.
I want you to make very certain Danzo isn't planning anything,
he says quietly. Genma's eyes narrow, and one hand curls ever so faintly, not quite forming a fist, even if the thought is there. You worry about treachery? He asks so softly that it's almost soundless. If there's one thing Genma hates more than Kumo Nin, it's traitors. Hiruzen might feel bad for taking advantage of what he knows is a sore point, but it's his entire reason for choosing Genma in the first place. There's absolutely no chance of him being won over or bought off, and if there's even the faintest hint that Danzo is doing anything but basic work for the council and village, Genma will never give up his investigation.
I think that access to 10 of the most powerful shinobi in the world, 4 of them young children, is quite a lot of temptation for a man who once trained children to be the perfect weapons.
Hiruzen admits, it's not the entire truth, but it is most of it, and the rest... Well, his show of trust in Fugaku has already helped bridges start to mend, and Shikaku's visits to the Uchiha compound to strategize have helped as well. He doesn't want to believe his old teammate is behind those whispers blaming the Uchiha for the Kyuubi, but he also would not put it past him. Thankfully, Genma isn't the type to overlook something like that if he comes across mention of it, and he's subtle enough that he likely won't get caught. If Danzo is planning something, if he's already done something, Genma will find it. Hokage-sama, Genma says formally, dipping into a bow, then steps back, turns on his heel, and heads down the stairs at a trot. Raido watches him go, concern shading across his features, but other than a quick glance darted at Hiruzen, he doesn't move. From behind the heavy door to his office, loud voices erupt, not quite shouting, but certainly close. Hiruzen sighs, rubbing his forehead, and goes back in to do damage control. Tsunade truly regrets attempting to intervene when she saw an adult spitting harsh words at a child. Well, she mostly regrets doing so because she knows now that the man was Uzumaki Kurama, grouchy mother hen to anything that stands still long enough for him to fuss at it. And his words were almost definitely meant to help, seeing as they were directed at the most emotionally stunted little boy she's ever had the horror of coming across. Even Orochimaru wasn't as bad as Uchiha Itachi is. So she regrets that part, seeing as Itachi most certainly didn't need her defense. She doesn't regret that Shizune was able to save the Hatake brat, though, even if most of her feelings come from knowing the man's father. Nor does she regret the chance to meet Kushina's son, who is every bit as bright and vivacious as his mother once was. Or her sort of nephew, because Kurama is, as she's coming to realize, entirely someone worth knowing. Of course, she could have done without the bet that left her sleeping off one of the worst hangovers in her life, and she definitely could have done without the 3 favors she now owes Kurama. One of which was going to Kiri to meet Naruto, and the other of which was accompanying him back to Konoha. It is vaguely conceivable that Tsunade could get out of it if she wanted. Kurama is certainly powerful. He moves with the ease and assuredness of someone fully aware that they can level mountains if they need to, and even Jiraiya treats him with grudging respect, to say nothing of the 9 Jinchuriki in their party. But he looks like he's just barely into his 30s. Tsunade has a good 20 years of experience on him, and if she wanted to slip away, she could. She doesn't want to go back to Konoha. That much she knows without hesitation. It holds too many memories, too much darkness. It's the place that Nawaki and Dan died for, gave their lives to protect, the place where she failed to save them, and there was another war after she left. There's always another war. When word reached her, she was so close to going back. Fighting broke out. Iwa invaded Kusa with the intent to reach Fire Country, and Tsunade, caught on the border, had her things halfway packed and her sandals on before she realized what she was doing. Before she realized what going back would mean. Shizune had been with her, young and stern, but still so soft, and Tsunade had looked at her and seen Dan in her features, in her future, had seen her apprentice bleeding and broken on the ground as war raged around her. She'd unpacked her bags and hidden herself away in a bar for the next week straight, then headed for Tea Country the moment she could walk in a straight line. That, she thinks, is one of the biggest sources of her ever-present guilt. She's the granddaughter of the Shodame, the grandniece of the Nidame, the student of the Sandame. Maybe she can't save everyone, maybe she can't save anyone, as the world has so handily proved, but something inside her is horrified that she wasn't there, that she didn't go back. It's the same bit that feels relief right now that someone is forcing her to return against her will. Dan and Nawaki are still open, tearing aches. There's no cure for them, no fix. Tsunade will always have failed to save them, will always remember their deaths as the twin moments where her world came tumbling down around her, but... Kuramani? A small voice asks, and Tsunade lifts her eyes from the dirt beneath her sandals to watch the red-headed man pause, looking down at the tiny shadow tugging on the hem of his shirt. What, Squirt? Kurama asks, using that tone he probably thinks is supposed to sound gruff. Tsunade can see through him like he's made of glass, though, and she can't fight a faint smile as she watches Genma reach up, solemn and quietly hopeful. Kurama takes one look at his expression and sighs. Don't you want to stick with Naruto? He asks, even as he bends down to scoop the little boy up onto his hip. Gaara glances back past Tsunade to where Naruto and Fu are letting the Reikage's brother toss them around like rubber balls. A pause, as if Gaara is searching for the words, and then he wrinkles his nose a little and says, He's loud. Tsunade snorts, because after several days on a boat with Bee, she can say with certainty that that's an understatement. At the same moment, Bee bellows something cheerful and sort of rhyming and chucks a happily screaming Naruto straight up in the air. Fu, clinging to Bee's back like a very small monkey, whoops with laughter, and Kurama winces very pointedly, not looking back. Yeah, he says a little tiredly and reaches up to ruffle Gaara's hair. That's a pretty good description of him, Squirt. Alright, you can ride with me for a bit. Seemingly content, Gaara puts his head down on Kurama's shoulder, hands still fisted in his shirt, and Tsunade can feel her smile softening. That's a pretty cute image, especially since Suna's Jinchuriki is supposed to be crazy. She suspects Kurama has something to do with the change, and for the little boy's sake, she's overwhelmingly glad. For the sake of all the Jinchuriki, she corrects herself, glancing from the two Bee is manhandling to the slim, dark-haired teenager walking with the other little girl, who's carrying a pair of foxes with multiple tails. Then her eyes move on to the Mizukage with his guards, and the mismatched pair walking ahead of him, joking with each other. There's an ease to them that she wouldn't have expected of Jinchuriki, especially given that several of them were previously on the run, and it makes her happy to see. Happier still that there's some kind of support, some kind of family tie between all of them. It will serve them well in the long run, especially if they're going to be facing down the villages that created them. Kurama probably needs all the family he can get, she thinks a little bleakly, glancing over at the man. Uzushiu is gone. Mito is gone. Kushina is gone. Practically every last Uzumaki, as far as she knows, is years dead. All Kurama has left is Naruto, and if what Jiraiya told her is true, he likely has spent the majority of his life either wandering alone or haunting the ruins of Uzushiyo like a ghost. Her shoulder bumps Jiraiya's as they walk, and she glances over automatically, but he just gives her a companionable smile and goes back to his conversation with Kakashi. And it's a reminder, Tsunade thinks a little sadly. A reminder that even after Dan and Nawaki died, she could have turned to the rest of her mismatched family, could have leaned on them. Jiraiya, Orochimaru, and Sarutobi at the very least, and she hadn't. Kurama lost far more than she did, lost everything, and still manages to find it within himself to be so painfully kind to lost children. With one quick glance back at Shizune, who's happily chattering with the Kiri Kunoichi, Tsunade lengthens her steps just a little, quickly drawing level with Kurama. He turns to her with some surprise, brows lifting, but Gaara shifts in his arms and distracts him before he can ask her anything. Tsunade watches him resettle the little boy, offering him a winter-stunted apple he'd picked up in the port city's market, and when he finally looks over at her, she just smiles.
You're something else, Shortcake,
she says, mostly for the pleasure of watching the face he pulls at the nickname. And you're an old hag. He huffs, not even trying to dodge the fist Tsunade thumps against his shoulder. It's only enough to make him stagger, but he's holding a kid. She's hardly about to go all out. Keeping her eyes ahead, she matches her step to Kurama's and asks lightly,
Did you ever get to meet Kushina?
Kurama hesitates, and she can feel his gaze on her, searching. Finally, he says, Not really. Not in any way that mattered. That's about what Tsunade expected. Kushina never mentioned a brother to her when she was mourning her lost village. A mother, an aunt, all of her friends. But no brother. And it's clear enough that Kurama has some other blood in him as well. A Kumo-nin father, Jiraiya said, and given how Kumo tried to kidnap Kushina when she was still in the academy, it makes sense to Tsunade.
But you saw her from a distance?
Tsunade prods. Yeah, Kurama admits, clearly grudging. Why are you asking? She doesn't look at him, keeps her pace steady and measured as they walk.
Because I know what it's like to have your family at a distance, and then to lose them entirely,
she says, simply thinking of Orochimaru, wondering, sad and a little resigned to her own guilt, whether she would have been able to save him. She doesn't need to wonder. She already knows she would have. Just one more failure to lay at her feet, isn't it? Gaara is watching her when she glances over. She offers him a small, slightly wan smile, and he doesn't quite smile back. All of his smiles are reserved for Kurama, Naruto, and the other Jinchuriki she's noticed. But he doesn't immediately duck his head and hide his face, which is more or less an improvement. Kurama breathes out rough and a little shaky, and it's clear her words struck some sort of chord. Yeah, he says, turning his face away. That's something I'm used to. The first part. I'm still getting used to the second. It's been almost 20 years since Uzushio fell. That's a hell of a long time to mourn. But Tsunade is hardly one to throw stones when her whole world is made of glass. And beyond that, she remembers something Mito once told her after Hashirama died and again after Tobirama was killed. Everyone grieves in their own time, my dear. Some cope by moving forward, others hold on even when the world tells them to let go. It doesn't mean they're broken. It just means they hold on a bit harder than most. Kurama, Tsunade thinks with a touch of wry sadness, is very much the type to leave claw marks in anything that slips from his grasp.